Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, Taiwan's vice premier says it's impossible to move 40% of the semiconductor production to the U.S. More on the tug of war between Washington and Taiwan over this critical technology. U.S. military forces pursued a sanctioned oil tanker from South America halfway across the globe, boarding it in the Indian Ocean. The ship was carrying oil bound for China. Visiting Bath Iron Works, War Secretary Pete Hegseth called for faster U.S. manufacturing. He says the Pentagon is pushing to rebuild the defense industrial base and prioritize U.S.-made weapons to meet battlefield demands. 4 years in prison for the former campaign advisor of a Southern California City Council member. He's been convicted of acting as an agent for China. A strategic Australian port becomes the battleground for U.S.-China tensions. Australia's Prime Minister aims to regain control of the Darwin port, triggering possible trade retaliations from China. And high-ranking military officers were purged. Insiders reveal that a quiet pushback is spreading through the Chinese military and into the civilian bureaucracy. A setback for the Trump administration's push to make advanced microchips on American soil. Taiwan's vice premier told Washington it's impossible to move 40% of its semiconductor production to the U.S. That's the goal of a trade deal currently underway, a deal she's traveling to the U.S. to finalize. The U.S. sources most of its advanced chips from Taiwan. These chips are critical for everything from cars to weapon systems. Here's Taiwan's vice premier speaking on Sunday.
It took us decades to develop this semiconductor production ecosystem. What we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. There's still a huge portion underwater.
Chen says Taiwan's microchip supply chain and ecosystem will continue to grow at home, but she adds Taiwan is willing to expand its investment in the U.S. It's pushback against what the U.S. is demanding from Taiwan. Last month, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said Taiwan should move 40% of its microchip supply chain and production to the U.S. He warned that if Taiwan refuses, tariffs on Taiwanese goods could shoot up to 100%. Meanwhile, there's a concern weighing on policymakers, the risk of a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has argued the U.S. can't leave critical chip manufacturing just 80 miles from China. Over in Taiwan, some worry the U.S. may be less willing to defend the island if most semiconductor production moves to America. Taiwan's TSMC, the world's leading chip maker, is investing over $160 billion to build factories in Arizona. Taiwan requires TSMC's overseas plants to use technology that's at least 2 generations behind the most advanced chips produced at home. Back to the trade negotiations now underway, the U.S. would lower tariffs on Taiwanese goods from 20% to 15%. In return, Taiwanese companies would invest $250 billion to expand chip production and AI development in the U.S. U.S. military forces have boarded a sanctioned oil tanker in the Indian Ocean. The ship was bound for China. War Secretary Pete Hegseth says the ship was tracked from the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean. That's halfway around the globe. The vessel has been identified as the Aquila II. It's been accused of breaking Washington's blockade on Venezuelan oil shipments. The tanker left Venezuelan waters in early January. It was carrying about 700,000 barrels of heavy crude bound for China. Most of the other ships in the group have already returned or been seized. The operation follows increased U.S. enforcement after Venezuelan regime leader Nicolas Maduro was captured in a military raid earlier this year. Washington says the blockade is meant to cut off illicit oil exports. Hegseth posted on X saying, quote, "The Department of War tracked and hunted this vessel from the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean. You will run out of fuel long before you will outrun us." As Washington sharpens its focus on great power competition, rebuilding America's defense industrial base is emerging as a top national priority. It lies at the heart of President Trump's second-term strategy of peace through strength. The administration is overhauling defense acquisition, cutting red tape, pushing contractors to boost production, and working to reduce reliance on China. On Monday, War Secretary Pete Hegseth visited Bath Iron Works, a major military shipyard in Maine. The visit was part of a nationwide Arsenal of Freedom tour aimed at revitalizing America's manufacturing might. Hegseth says imports and outsourcing are no longer driving Pentagon procurement decisions. The focus now is on a U.S.-made supply chain built around the needs of the warfighter and the demands of the battlefield. Last April, President Trump signed an executive order to reform defense procurement. The order aims to streamline processes, reshape the workforce, and reward risk-taking and innovation. Under the Defense Production Act, federal acquisition regulations, and the new executive order, the War Secretary is now authorized to evaluate contractor performance. He can also compel improvements when necessary. In the National Defense Strategy released last month, the Trump administration pledged a $1.5 trillion defense budget by 2027. The strategy elevates the U.S. defense industrial base, placing it among 4 core priorities shaping America's military future. During his remarks, Hegseth praised Bath Iron Works, calling its manufacturing the best in the country. Last December, the shipyard announced it's willing to work with the U.S. Navy to design and build what Trump called a golden fleet. The former campaign advisor of a Southern California City Council member was sentenced Monday to 4 years in prison. He's been accused of acting as an agent for China without notifying U.S. authorities. Sun Yao-ning, also known as Mike's son, worked as a campaign advisor in the 2022 city council race in Arcadia, a Los Angeles suburb. He was arrested at the end of 2024. Prosecutors say he sought to influence U.S. politicians on the issue of Taiwan and to suppress Chinese dissidents on U.S. soil, including practitioners of Falun Gong, a spiritual group persecuted by Beijing. Sun also kept close tabs on then Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen during her April 2023 visit to Southern California, reporting her movements directly to Chinese officials. On top of that, he ran a news website aimed at the local Chinese American community, posting content that supported the Chinese Communist Party. The U.S. pushing to bolster defense in the Indo-Pacific in preparation of a potential conflict over Taiwan. The Pentagon plans to deploy 4 submarines to a base in Australia. According to the Wall Street Journal, the first sub is set to arrive at the HMAS Sterling Naval Base next year. Meanwhile, Australia is investing billions of dollars into the base and a nearby maintenance zone. That deployment could give the U.S. military an edge in a potential conflict over Taiwan or the South China Sea. A U.S. commander says having a repair facility nearby would allow the Navy to return to the fight more quickly. Currently, most submarine maintenance is done in Guam, Pearl Harbor, and on the U.S. mainland. U.S. submarines could also help Australia patrol key maritime choke points. The deployment is part of the AUKUS deal between the U.S., the U.K., and Australia. Under the agreement, Australia will receive a few nuclear-powered submarines from the U.S. These subs are quieter, faster, and can stay underwater longer than Australia's current fleet. About 1,200 U.S. and U.K. personnel are expected to move to areas near Stirling. The U.K. also plans to send a submarine there. One of our viewers asked us to shed more light on the CCP's infiltration in Australia. Here's an example from the military sector, an Australian port under Beijing's control. Darwin Port, a key northern port in Australia, was leased in 2015 to Chinese company Landbridge for 99 years and a nearly $450 million deal. Now, Australia's Prime Minister says he's committed to bringing the port back under Australian control, citing security concerns over its critical infrastructure. The port sits in a strategic location as the U.S. and Australia expand northern air bases to host American bombers. Washington had criticized the original lease when it was signed. Meanwhile, China's ambassador in Australia warned that forcing the Chinese company to give up control could trigger trade retaliations. That's a big pressure point since China is Australia's largest trading partner. China imports more than 25% of Australian goods such as iron ores, lithium, natural gas, and agricultural goods. Coming up, high-ranking military officers were purged. Insiders reveal that a quiet pushback is spreading through the Chinese military and into the civilian bureaucracy. Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai was sentenced by a Hong Kong court to 20 years in prison. For a 78-year-old, this is essentially a life sentence. A former U.S. ambassador to Fiji says the case reveals the true nature of the Chinese Communist Party.
The Chinese Communist Party, Marxism, Leninism, is really radically contrary to human nature and ultimately will not stand the test of time.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A quiet pushback against Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping. Insiders told the Epoch Times that passive non-compliance, which began in the Chinese military, is now spreading into the civilian bureaucracy. This is making it harder for Xi to enforce his directives. A source familiar with elite party politics says the change stems from the purge of Zhang Youxia, vice chairman of the Central Military Commission. It also follows the removal of Liu Zhenli, chief of the Joint Staff Department. Xi Jinping's move has sent shockwaves through the army and could have broader consequences for the Chinese Communist Party. Those speaking to the Epoch Times remain anonymous for fear of reprisal. Still, the emerging picture raises serious questions about Xi's control over China's military. 78-year-old pro-democracy British Hong Kong businessman Jimmy Lai was sentenced by a Hong Kong court to 20 years in prison on Monday. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in a statement calling the verdict an unjust and tragic conclusion to this case. To discuss these developments, NTD's Steve Lance was joined by former U.S. Ambassador to Fiji, Joseph Sella, who is also a friend of Jimmy Lai.
What might be surprising to many is that, Jimmy Lai is a British citizen. He's not a mainland Chinese citizen, Hong Kong as well. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer visiting China just about a week ago, calling for a renewed strategic partnership with China. Here's Jimmy Lai's son, Sebastian, commenting on this.
And how can we have closer relationships? How can we normalize relationships if a British citizen who's 78, whose only crime is standing up for freedom and democracy, defending his colleagues, defending the people of Hong Kong, is still in jail in Hong Kong? I mean, this is a very easy thing for Hong Kong and China to do, to show good faith to our nation, to show good faith to our government. But put this man on a plane, send him over to the UK, it'll take them 2 hours. If they're not even willing to do something like that, I think that tells you all you need to know about the relationship.
Ambassador, how many more instances of the CCP's transnational repression do we have to witness? And what does this ultimately show us about the nature of the CCP and how the world's community should be treating them, especially the UK?
Well, I think they're very opportunistic, and they will seize a moment if they find a weak link, if you will. And regrettably, for his country, which he bears citizenship to, really has not fought for him as stridently as I would argue the United States has, and that's regrettable. I'm hoping that this is a moment for the world to be aware of the malign ways and to be very careful of the dealings that China has in these international situations, but on their own shores, the malign activities, subnational incursions, and so forth. So I'm hopeful that we'll see a repeat of history, perhaps through the leadership of President Trump and Secretary Rubio, where soon enough Jimmy will be freed. I'm praying for that.
During the last interview before his arrest, Jimmy Lai was actually speaking on his loyalty to Hong Kong.
I come here with $1. I got everything I have because of this place. You know, a wonderful family. You know, they're very supportive. If this is the payback time, this is my redemption.
You must fear some things for your family, for Hong Kong, for your loved ones.
Yes, I do have fear. You're right.
For decades, Ambassador, it was a one country, two systems recognition where, the British handed it over to China, and then it really sort of took effect, the CCP implementing its own policy there gradually as that finally, took place. Talk to us about the decisions that Jimmy Lai made to stay and fight for freedom in Hong Kong.
I think it's a testament to his character. I think it's a testament to his faith. He is a role model for others who are subjugated under the boot of totalitarianism around the world and will be forever, come what may for Jimmy. He has traveled the heights of power and in business, and has met great success. However, that is very transitory for him. He knows he could have gotten on a plane as soon as he knew what was coming, but he opted to stay and fight on principle. What is not transitory is his faith and belief in Jesus, and he is a solid believer in the Catholic Church and is a witness for all to follow, whether laity or religious, and certainly should be an inspiration to those fighting for freedom against subjugation around the world, civilians and elected officials alike.
So he was obviously a very successful business tycoon in Hong Kong. He also founded the Apple Daily, which was a media conglomerate. So this really, at the core of all of this, we're looking at freedom of speech and a free press. In Hong Kong, independent media, since the merging with mainland China, has been under tremendous pressure to just simply survive. For example, our sister media, the Epoch Times, had to stop printing in Hong Kong. We had folks in the Epoch Times print press. It was ransacked and set on fire, the print presses. Why is the loss of free press key to the CCP's control in Hong Kong?
Because they want to drive the narrative from the top down. They control everything from the top down, no matter the sector or strata. Business, academia, media. If we have a media presence from the United States, it has to be they have to be bought in so that they can censor, and they do not want the unvarnished truth to be told, as your good offices do, as Apple Daily did, because I think that would expose the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, its nefarious ways, that I do not really think will stand the test of time. In the Cold War, we saw that was painful, very difficult, very bloody time, but eventually that Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, and I think that the Chinese Communist Party, Marxism, Leninism, is really radically contrary to human nature and ultimately will not stand the test of time. So I think they're very insecure about the nature of their ideology, and it could quickly come to an end if the winds of freedom were to blow, and they're being very careful to make sure that doesn't happen.
Former Ambassador Joseph Sella, really appreciate you joining us.
Washington's oil sanction in South America affecting Cuba. Canada's largest airline says it's suspending flights to Cuba because the island does not have enough jet fuel. Air Canada says it will carry out ferry flights to get 3,000 customers home. The fuel shortage comes after the U.S. disrupted oil shipments from Venezuela following the ousting of former dictator Nicolas Maduro. Air Canada says it will bring in extra fuel for the remaining flights. Two other Canadian airlines also canceled flights over anticipated fuel shortages. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.